Good morning. This is Anna from Shunned for Good Reason, and I'm here to let you know whether or not you're in a cult. This week on the podcast, we are going to be talking about cults and how I and my partner were in one, and it did last for about 30 years there. So it was quite a long time. We were both born into it. But I need to clarify a few things first on what a cult is. We think about cults in a lot of ways. Lots of people think like Disney adults are a cult, Stanley Cups are a cult, ICU nurses are a cult, all sorts of things qualify as cults in our mind. But I want to give you just a little bit more context for what a cult actually is. So, you have a religion right up here. Okay? Under this religion, you have types of that religion. So those come down in branches. Those are called denominations. Those are usually basically okay. They all adhere to the same tenets essentially, but there's a couple key differences between each denomination usually. So think a religion is Christianity. Denominations of that, don't crucify me on this one, denominations of the religion of Christianity are Catholicism and Protestantism. Don't come at me. I know it's been 500 years. Okay. So let's go with Protestantism because that's the one I know better. Protestantism is a kind of Christianity. Underneath that, you're going to have your Lutherans, you're going to have your evangelicals, you're going to have your LDS, essentially. Underneath that, you have specific churches. So under Protestantism, then under evangelicalism, you're going to have, for example, New Life Church here in Colorado Springs. That's an institutionalized church. It is part of the denomination of evangelicalism under the religion of Christianity. Underneath that, there are subsets. So we're going religion, denomination, church, and then usually underneath that, although sometimes this can be underneath the denomination itself, you will have sects. So your sect can be either a church or a subset of a church or a little net that goes between subsets of a denominational kind of church. Some of these are institutionalized. Some of these are, for instance, the Promise Keepers or Turning Point, that sort of thing. The people who follow basically the same books, basically the same leaders, etc., etc., etc. Those are institutionalized. Like the church actually recognizes those. Those are actually something that they will admit to, essentially, and claim. In that same subset are cults. So a cult is a more or less coherent body of people who follow the same subset of teachings and believe that their subset of teachings is superior to the subset of teachings than any other institutionalized sect, church, denomination, or religion. You with me? Okay. So, what makes an institutionalized sect different from a cult? Let me tell you, I'm so glad you asked. So, a cult has to have a few things. Often we'll associate a cult with like a specific spiritual leader, somebody charismatic, think like Jim Jones in Jonestown or like the Moonies. Usually we associate this with like a huge sexual scandal or multi-person murder or everybody taking their own lives, that sort of thing. That's not what necessarily makes a cult, though. A cult has to have a few things. A cult needs to have control over your time. A cult has to have control over your finances. A cult has to have control over your sexual life. And a cult has to have control over your thoughts. All of those sound really difficult to achieve, but they're not. If you look at evangelicalism in general, it will automatically take control over your time. You have to be at church on Sunday. If you're good, you're going to be at church at least once on Sunday for at least 2 hours. And then most likely Wednesday or Thursday or Friday, at least 2 days a week. You have to schedule around this plus your small group. After that, you have to have financial control. Evangelicalism goes on a premise that you have to tithe. Tithing is giving at least 10% of your entire income to the church. And churches will have different rules for this. Sometimes it's your gross income, sometimes it's your net income. Sometimes they say 10% of your monetary income and 10% of your time income has to go to the church. That's dependent. But there we've got the time aspect. You have to be at church on these times, and you have to be involved in stuff. You have the financial aspect. You have to give 10% of everything to this church. And then the sexual one. Now, in evangelicalism, this was hugely, hugely popular in the 90s and early aughts. And a lot of it was based on Joshua Harris's I Kiss Dating Goodbye, that sort of movement popularized by Focus on the Family, James Dobson, where any sexual thoughts, any sexual content had to be mediated through the church. They would, in the most extreme cases, they would find your spouse. They would allow you to only date within the church itself. And then usually you had to have an accountability partner, which was somebody who you would talk to about these sexual thoughts that you had, if you had sexual thoughts, and they had to hold you accountable. And if something bad happened, they had to go to the elders, and then you would be penalized according to that. But the basic rule was sex, back to kissing, back to like any sort of thought about physicality whatsoever, had to be mediated by the church itself. So we've got the time control, the financial control, the sexual control. Then let's go to the thought control, because that's a big one. Lots of our Christian evangelical cults had to have you go to Bible school. And not just Bible school, but camps, missions trips, etc., etc. But the whole point was you would be there. They would be able to control when you slept, when you ate, when you got up, and what you were allowed to intake. So we had books and magazines and film that we were allowed to intake, and the rest of that, anything from Hollywood, anything that had not been approved by the church elders or the mission elders, was taboo. Like, don't do that. If you do that, we might forgive it maybe, but if it starts affecting you, so you're doing something that we don't approve of, then yeah, you can't have that anymore. So, time control, financial control, sexual control, thought control. And in a lot of that, we were not allowed to sleep for extended periods of time. You had to wake up at a certain time, go to bed at a certain time. Anything that you did had to be passed by the spiritual leaders, especially if you were devout enough to go to camp or mission or Bible school. So a lot of us grew up in this. It didn't necessarily need one charismatic leader, because the Focus on the Family, James Dobson sort of era made every single family its own cult, where the father is in ultimate control and acts as a protector and defender of the cult of the family. So that is a very basic overview of evangelical cults, and I hope that this was helpful.